I found this piece originally in Vanity Fair, which was a synthesis of the book, and then eventually kind of, the book became available to Hollywood. When I learned of the story of John and Alicia Nash, I grabbed it immediately and paid and begged and ended up getting it. Ron wasn't available to make the movie at the time, but was always very interested in the subject and particularly the Nash story. Many A directors were calling and wanting to get together and said they had, point of view on the piece. I even focused on a particular director, but it turned out that this director was available to make the movie exactly when Ron was available. So I get to choose. So I chose Ron Howard. He agreed that he would absolutely make the movie and that he wouldn't turn back and that he loved it. And I said, how much do you love it? And he said he would pledge his commitment. And as friends and partners, it was kind of fun to sort of test each other creatively. Once Ron gets involved, really involved in making a movie, and we talk about sort of how we see the movie and its style, Ron will test me along the way, not as a pop quiz, but as a test to sort of, I think, to see whether his vision is being adhered to. So he'll ask questions about the dailies, or he'll ask questions about a performance a little bit, or are we going in the right direction?
I decided to direct it, you believed in it enough to produce it. Are we actually getting it? Or if I've drifted off in some direction, or if I become too myopic, or if I made too many compromises, or all the things that can erode sort of the vision or what needs to be done to make a story really take off and work.
Essentially, we would be able to reduce this idea, this book, this piece, into a sentence or two. If one were to draw a vertical line from that sentence down to the end, we try to follow that vertical line as closely as possible within the format of the collaboration of a film. So Ron will find questions and ideas that are curious to him day in and day out, and we talk about those questions.
One of the other things that is great about the collaboration, where Brian provides to me a kind of a creative safety net. Brian has broad instincts that he trusts. I don't mean broad like a zany broad. I mean in terms of the arcs and shapes and understanding the kind of the emotion, the intellectual intent, and the big thematic values in a story. One of the things that I really rely on Brian a lot for is to also touch base and say, how are we doing in terms of the big picture, the grand scheme of things? I get fascinated by all the details, the nuances of performance, the visual possibilities, and just all the mechanics of making the movie. The most important ideas are those big ideas. And it's really great that Brian, in fact, has a little distance. Brian doesn't come to the set every day when I'm directing a movie. He's running Imagine. He comes every so often, but that's kind of good.
Okay, action!
I go every day on movies that need it more.
Well, okay, but for me it works out really well because Brian does keep just enough objectivity that he's still sort of that first most important audience member, in a way. An audience member who had like great anticipation for what the movie could be, which in a way is the toughest audience member. And that's another just sort of virtue in the relationship as it's developed over the years.
Creatively, we end up at the same place. Qualitatively, which is sort of in that same category, we end up at the same place. And our value system and work ethic is largely similar. But the way we get there is almost entirely different, down to just the big base components of the fact that Ron lives on the East Coast and I live on the West Coast. That forces my discipline to, think about, how to manage the logistics of a thing.
But it also does start with identifying ideas. And I mean, going back to the beginning of our partnership, Night Shift was Brian's idea, Splash was Brian's idea, and Brian chased down A Beautiful Mind, and he believed in it, identified that and catalyzed it, made it go. We found over the years that when we sort of agree on something, generally that becomes, a pretty strong bet, a pretty strong choice. When there's a difference, when sometimes one or the other of us can be right or wrong, but when we happen to line up, you can really almost put that one away and kind of count on it.
I met with Akiva, I met with other screenwriters, mostly very serious dramatists. But Akiva wanted to do it so badly. His desire was so strong. And he had a take, you know, the beginnings of a take, which it turned out to be what the movie was, you know, having an living through an alternate reality. And not knowing that you were living through this alternate reality until a certain point. But it also got you very much inside the mind of mental illness.
Y tus trailers, visita mi canal.
I encountered the book in galleys, Sylvia Nasr's extraordinary biography. And what's remarkable about it is it's very much the outside of a life. John doesn't remember much of the time when he was ravaged by his disease. John doesn't remember his delusions. He doesn't know what he saw or what he believed, except in the briefest snippets. So this afforded me an interesting opportunity, which is within this perfectly detailed exterior life, I could build an inner life, and in so doing, give the audience a window into what it might feel like to suffer from this disease. And what I wanted to do was to show the audience the world the way the person who suffers from the disease sees it first, then rob them of that security in the same way that somebody who suffers from the disease is robbed. So the experience of the movie would be, in the smallest possible way, a replication of the experience of the disease.
Imagine if you had suddenly learned that the people, the places, the moments most important to you were not gone, not dead, but worse, had never been.
I was very excited by the material, and it was owned by Brian Grazer and Imagine Pictures. I went to Brian, and I actually begged him to hire me. There was singing, there was dancing, there was cajoling. I shared with him my idea, which was to build this inner landscape and make it as real to the audience as delusions are to people who suffer from schizophrenia. And oddly, Brian was kind enough to entrust the material to me. The first thing you do, or the first thing I do when writing an adaptation is to steep myself in the source material. I read the book several times. I researched the periods that seemed of significance to me as the story was starting to take shape in my mind, so that I was steeped in the environment. Sometimes you just read almanacs, you know, what are the songs that were playing, what shows were on Broadway, what did people call their shoes, you know, and what happens is the era creeps into your understanding of the world, so that it informs your writing in ways that you're not aware of, and certainly, you know, you don't use most of the detail, but it's in there, in your head. The most significant voice, besides my own, in the script, in its first draft, its first incarnations, is a woman named Karen Kahila, who runs, who's co-chairman of Imagine. And Karen and I got into a room, and for days and days just sat there bouncing, working idea and talking it through, and what do you think of it? Oh my God. And I think Karen looked at me one day and she said, Marcy never gets old. I was like, Marcy never gets old, which is one of the major turning points of the movie, as we were struggling to figure out how John would represent his understanding of
She never gets old.
His illness to the audience.
Marcy can't be real. She never gets old.
As a creative partner, she was wildly significant. And then Ron read the script, and he liked it.
It's a good, strong moment.
And background.
Okay, and action.
And Ron said, I'd like to direct it, which, A, never happens, right? Nobody wants to direct your first draft, much less Ron Howard.
Does that seem efficient enough? Does that seem believable enough that they really communicated to the guard? That it's sort of official enough? Or should Saul stay and talk to him a little longer? One more.
He simply goes, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Listen, and then decides what to do. But he really listens. It's not perfunctory. But so Ron, for example, felt that the love story was missing in the middle of the piece, and he would say to me, you might want to try a scene where he proposes to her, which is incidentally one of my favorite scenes in the movie and was not in the first draft. And I'm like, oh, Ron, that'll never work. And he goes, yeah, well, you just give it a try. So I'm sitting there and I'm typing.
How big is the universe?
And I did it 2 or 3 times over the course of a week or 2.
I know, because all the data indicate the symptoms.
But it hasn't been proven yet.
No.
Yeah.
And then I just thought,
How do you know for sure?
oh my God.
don't.
And I called up Ron and I went, okay, fine, it works. And I love that scene.
It's the same with love, I guess.
You know, my other favorite scene is the scene where Jennifer says, I'd like to believe something extraordinary is possible. I mean, I wrote that scene 75 times, literally. And each time, it got less and less work.
Maybe it's here.
So that the one you see finally has very few. I could show you pages.
I need to believe that something extraordinary is possible.
Russell came in after the first draft. Ron supervised now the second draft, and we send it to Russell. And Russell decides to do it. And then we got into this postmodern feedback loop of writer, director, actor. We'd be in rehearsals, and Russell would start to say something, and I would look at Ron, and Ron would point over there, and then I'd start writing, and then Russell would say, there's too many R's there, and I'd hear the sound. And we'd just start whipping around in this kind of make it while it's happening way. And that went on all the way through a movie, whether it be on the day and the construction of a line or a moment, or structurally, so that as I watched Russell grow his nails to feel his fingers, it occurred to me that when he needed to dig out his implant, I could use the nails rather than what used to be in the script, which was a brad off a bed. And so it was performance, direction, script, all feeding into each other all the time.
Serious film. It's strong.
Mental health movies are often like going to the zoo. They can be wonderful, but you go with the normal person surrogate, and together you view the person with mental illness. You see the disease from the outside in, and it does a disservice to our ability to empathize and understand. If we saw the world the way people who suffer see it, we would understand them differently. The hope being that if one person came home from the movie theater, just one, and saw somebody screaming at empty air on a street corner and related to them differently, with understanding, then we would have done our job.
I got this idea to, I wanted him to explain the Nash equilibrium and the bargaining theories to me. And I thought, well, maybe we should just videotape it. And I asked him if I could do that, and I got Todd Hollowell to come along and man a second camera. John was comfortable with Todd. And I found a really different Nash, much less guarded, really vibrant, really alive, interested. It was great. It was also encouraging, because the man I'd been meeting with was a little more withdrawn, and here he's still kind of a little bit unusual and somewhat eccentric in the way he expresses himself, but so clear, so interested, so vital that I fully understood the miracle of his recovery after spending that time with him in his office.
I could use this as a guideline here. This is my basic paper. Right. You see, there's no drawing, there's a formula.
Right.
There's not a drawing in the thing. There are some tables here.
Right.
These are examples of solutions to equilibrium points of the game. And here's a table. These are examples. I have a bunch of examples. Here we managed to use all the Greek letters, but there were 24 quantities.
Did you have fun getting all the letters in?
Yeah, here's omega. Yes. Somehow I liked the deal. Maybe that's why they gave me an honorary degree in Athens. This illustration. The basic transformation, this is the existence of equilibrium points in the thesis paper, right? Sort of a polished version of it. So theorem 1, every finite game has an equilibrium point. This is a special type of, yeah, I'm not using Greek letters so much, but I'm using a sort of a German. But S being an n-tuple of mixed strategies. This means these are n players in the game. Then PI of S is
payoff.
Yeah, to player I. PI is the payoff to player I, resulting from this whole set of strategies.
Right.
Everyone is doing something, behaving in a certain way. We just find about probabilities of their strategies. So what happens? Well, each of them gets a payoff resulting from that. So if you start out, player I is playing a mixed strategy. All the players are playing mixed strategies. Some probability of this, some probability of that, but that's fixed. Now, if he changes to this particular pure strategy, his alpha pure strategy is assuming that it's a strategy for this player and it's a certain number of ones, some subsystem of counting, then it might be that he will do better. If he could change that way.
Right.
And, but now this thing says that if he does worse, this thing will be simply 0. It's not going to take note of that except as 0. But if he does better, it's going to take note of that.
Now, let me just ask this: in defining this and shaping this, is this something that you would sort of instantly know, or is this something that you would have to actually work on and experiment with this facet of this step?
I worked on that because this is sort of some cooking, and this is to arrange that the proof goes smoothly.
Right.
But after you set it up, it is pretty simple. My last sentence here, since the space of n-tuples is a cell, it's a mathematical term for this convex, effectively a convex body. The Bauer fixed point theorem requires that T must have at least one fixed point, S, which must be an equilibrium. If nothing changes here, the thing is that if nothing changes, then these numbers are all 0. And if these numbers are all 0, these phi's, then this thing is an equilibrium point. Which means that no player has any pure strategy that he could use that would give him more of a payoff in relation to what the others are using. It's like a rubber sheet. If you had like a triangle, and continuously every point of the triangle moves to be another point of the triangle, somehow motion, there will be some point that is fixed. A triangle would correspond to the, like strategies of one player. If you had 3 pure strategies, his mixed strategies would form a triangle. But if you have more players, then you have to combine these things together in the interaction. You could have a square, a rectangle that could correspond to 2 players, and each of them had 2 strategies.
The other thing that was exciting to learn is that John is really engaged in ongoing research. Don't ask me to explain it, but it was fascinating to see what he was working on and to see how actively involved he is and how excited he is by it. So that was fun too.
I'm carrying his briefcase. This goes back even to the time when I could be considered mentally ill. I started using computer paper, but it was when I was coming out of it. I found out that they had this computer here, they had a certain type of paper, and they would discard some of it. So I could pick it up, and I used it as note paper. This is very recent work. This page is all concerned with the relativity concept, which might or might not work out. I might delete to something. It wouldn't be very big, but it might be something. A 4th order equation.
What did you say on the 4th order?
A 4th order, yes.
What does that mean?
Well, it's like 4th derivatives. The equations of general relativity are 2nd order in terms of derivatives. involves second-order derivatives in terms of something called the metric tensor on space-time continuum. And the idea of fourth-order equations is not new, but no one has found anything that really looks good.
I asked John at one point, I said, well, you know, more people are going to, in the general population, are going to know your name now than before. Are you going to go out on the public speaking circuit? You've got a remarkable story to tell. And people will pay you to do this. He said, well, maybe, but he said, you know, I lost a lot of years, and I really think of myself first and foremost as a researcher. And, you know, I think I'm going to stick to that. I've got a lot of work to do.
Dr. John Nash, your analysis of equilibrium non-cooperative games and all your other contributions to game theory have had a profound effect on the way economic theory has developed in the last 2 decades. Professor Reinhard Selten, Ihr Gefühl für Perfektion in der Gleichgewichtsanalyse hat den Gebrauch der nicht-kooperativen Spieltheorie wesentlich erweitert. It's an honor and privilege for me to convey to all of you, on the behalf of the Royal Academy of Sciences, our warmest congratulations. I now ask you to receive your prizes from the hand of His Majesty the King.
John Hassani, han är ungrare av börden han också, och ännu en av dem som tvingades fly västerut på 50-talet. Han är 74 år nu och han har varit professor vid universitetet i Berkeley i Kalifornien. Det är 45 år sedan den då geniförklarade John Nash, matematiker, formulerade sin spelteori. Sen dröjde det inte länge förrän han drabbades av svår schizofreni och var borta från forskarvärlden i 30 år, och först nu så har hans sjukdom släppt. Och det är väl, kan man säga, något av ett mirakel. Har alla pristagare fått sitt diplom, sin medalj, och pengarna får de faktiskt först på måndag. Och nu nationalsång.
Casting is absolutely, that's a period of real nail-biting for me. It's a vague, kind of mysterious process. I have a lot of empathy for what the actors are doing, but at the same time, it's crucial that I take a great deal of care at that stage. Mistakes made in casting can almost never be rectified. It can be that important that if you get it wrong, you may well wind up having to do something as hideous as replace someone. I like to be thorough enough in the casting process so there's a level of trust when it comes time to rehearse and shoot. It was, on paper, a great screen performance, but kind of a scary character to take on. So I needed somebody with real courage. Well, John Nash is a very complex character, and interpreting that character, you needed an actor, you know, with the ability, with the sort of the presence and charisma to command your interest, you know, over a period of time, and the talent to pull it off, and also the nerve.
The reason I wanted Russell really more than anybody is that he is able to communicate with you without words. He's able to get you interested in him through his charisma and intelligence that you read out of his eyes.
When I met with him, I wasn't 100% convinced going into the meeting, but I was very, very interested in discussing it with him. And I found that his questions were important. The intelligence that he displayed asking these questions was very exciting for me, because look, I knew he was charismatic and I knew he was talented, but I saw a level of intelligence that, of course, whoever played Nash had to be able to display. You can't really act it, fake it. It's not a matter of just saying the words. That spark has to be there, and I saw it there in spades.
Russell understands cinematic impact, so he has enough understanding and confidence in that he's able to convey ideas, in this case get you inside someone's feelings and someone's mind.
Russell's very intense, but I don't get the feeling it's a show. It's really about the vibe that he feels he needs to try to create something, or sometimes the vibe that he thinks the entire set needs to sort of get in the right space to maximize the scene.
It took a while to get him. He was very excited about it, and then he went off to make a movie that put him in another time zone. And he's very much a man and an actor that is in the present, in that moment. So when he's in this other time zone, and he's making another movie, it was hard to, get in touch with him and kind of close this deal.
Russell is a very charismatic guy, but a character actor at heart. He wants to discover a character, sort of define it within his own terms, kind of ingest it, and then present it back to you in a way that's insightful and entertaining. This is kind of his genius.
We read hundreds of actresses, some stars, models, people unknowns, the whole gamut of possibilities for this role of Alicia Nash. And we had just seen Requiem of a Dream, and that just took her to a higher level for us.
I was absolutely sure with Jennifer. I had a strong hunch from just meeting her and talking to her about the project. I thought her instincts about the character were correct. Alicia was inordinately beautiful and unusually ambitious academically when she met Nash. Jennifer's background is Yale and Stanford. She looks a little bit like young Alicia Nash, which again wasn't crucial, but was something in her favor. I really knew when I saw Jennifer and Russell auditioning together. Russell already had the part. He was reading with a number of actors, both in New York and LA. Their scenes together just clicked.
And in those moments where you do these private readings, you get a sense immediately, is there a chemistry? And the chemistry is something that you identify on a lot of different levels. Is she going to challenge him in a way that he'll stay at the top of his game? Because if the actress isn't good as an artist, he won't be challenged, he won't feel pushed, and he won't be at the top of his game. So you need people around someone like Russell Crowe that he respects.
There was a strength that Jennifer demonstrated with total humanity. There were no walls. You just felt that there was going to be tremendous interaction and chemistry between the two of them as actors. We had one good advantage in that Russell Crowe had worked with Greg Canham, the makeup artist, key makeup artist, on The Insider. I had also worked with Greg Canham on Cocoon, and so I had a good rapport. But really the key here was that Russell and Greg were able to just keep trying, go back in the trailer, keep looking at pictures of Nash, and keep working on it. The other thing is that while there's very little to go on in terms of who young Nash really was, what he sounded like, how he moved, any of those things that would have keyed Russell Crowe's performance, he actually did have a chance to see what the elder John Nash was like. And it gave Russell a real handle in terms of actually really creating a total character. So, they weren't just making an old man makeup that would sort of fit Russell's face. They were actually working toward a character.
The first thing we do is break the script down and how many stages of makeup for each person. And then we go through each character and figure out exactly how many years span and how much are we cheating it. Because 5 years pass, but then well, you're not going to see much really makeup-wise. Maybe we should cheat a little more. So we had to, figure out the points where he did really see a difference in ages. The one thing I'm really happy about in this film is the flow of the makeup. Usually you see, people jump from young to old, back and forth, whatever, but this film I thought just flowed beautifully with him young, going through to where you don't notice the makeup too much. Towards the end of the film, it just kind of flows and you actually see him aging gradually. And we tried really to do subtle changes, you know. In the beginning it was more like, well, we'll go with making Russell look more like Russell. But then as we went along, Russell said, well, you know, let's make him look a little more like Nash. So I went a lot heavier with the character makeup, like the eye bags. I never would do eye bags this big on somebody. But I knew for this film and the character and everything, I thought they would work. We basically started with him young, and we did a youth makeup on him and made him look as young as we could. Neil Martz did most of that. And then at the point when he goes into the hospital, I took over his makeup, and I then started using actually aged. They wanted him physically aged 5 to 10 years at that point when he gets the shock therapy and that. So at that point, I started using stipple on the corner of his eyes to get the crease to come down, and highlight and shadow, and actually started, you know, the dark around the eyes for that look, and really tried at that point aging him about 10 years subtly. And then from that we went on to where I started adding in a little tiny neck piece, silicone neck piece, and then we started with a bigger neck piece and tiny appliances in here, silicone appliances, and then old age stipple more and more, which wrinkles the skin up to age, and the forehead, real subtle, and then just adding more, and then the pieces got bigger as he aged. Till the end of the film he's got a full neck on and cheek appliances and a bald pate with a wig on to recede his hairline. And it was just so much. I did 9 stages of makeup on Russell. And luckily they shot it in chronology pretty much, so we were able to luckily do it that way. But there were some days when we had to go back and forth just trying to keep track of it, and how his beard, sometimes he had beard growth, sometimes he didn't. There were like 6 levels of beard growth, 1 day growth up to 6 days growth. We had to keep track of that. The other thing in the film which was really hard to deal with were the teeth, because he wore fake teeth all through the film to give him an overbite.
Without teeth.
With teeth.
This film, Wes Wofford and myself developed this silicone. I decided I want to create a silicone that's like foam, where you can put it on in overlapping appliances, which works better. When you have a whole face piece and try to glue it down, it takes like 7-8 hours, and it's like trying to put Jell-O on someone's face, and you get air bubbles in it, and it's just a nightmare. But I wanted to do overlapping silicone appliances, and also appliances that I can use any makeup on, so we could make it up in the same amount of time as foam, but the movement is amazing. This is Russell's cheek. This went on this side of the face and blended onto a neck. This is the silicone we've developed. It's an incredibly soft, very floppy, very fleshy piece, and it has great movement in it. And it wrinkles very natural. It gets little tiny wrinkles in it and everything. Very thin edges. When you glue this down on his face, the edges blend into his skin, and then we cover it with makeup and different colors and break it up and everything. When we take it off, it's destroyed. The piece doesn't work anymore. The edges are destroyed, so we have to throw it away. We have to make one of these each day of shooting on a film. And this is Russell's old age neck right here. We do a big full wraparound piece. The cheek piece would like fit over then. That's why I was talking about overlapping pieces. So we put this on first, and then this glues onto his cheek, and then would glue down onto his neck, get rid of the edges, and you can see how just incredibly mushy this stuff is. So the movement is just amazing how well it would move. He could even stretch his neck up, and it stretches like real skin. It took about 4 hours to get Russell into this every day. You know, you have to glue it on one piece at a time, and then color it, and the bald pate, and then the hair goes on, and the old age spots, you know, and it's, you know, people just have no idea how involved this stuff is. But it's just, you know, to make one of these appliances and then you throw it away every day. I was real happy at the end of the film when you see Russell doing his speech, and you can see his neck moving, and you can see him swallowing, and you see the movement, and he's turning sideways, you know, and it's all moving, and it, to me, you know, I've never seen anything that real. It's pretty amazing, but it is fun. You know, it is definitely fun, especially when you see it on the screen. You really feel like you've really accomplished something, and you know, that's when it's exciting, you know, to see it on the screen. So
we had done a couple of films with Digital Domain, really ambitious ones, Apollo 13 and The Grinch. And there's not a lot of visual effects in this, but in working on both films, I got to know an effects designer named Kevin Mack, who's a really brilliant guy and knows a lot about math and science. And so much of this was trying to understand and express visually the workings of the mind, and not so much the madness, but more the creativity, and trying to organize these abstract sort of thoughts. And I really thought Kevin would do a great job, and he was really helpful.
We get involved very early, even before there's a finished script. So for instance, on A Beautiful Mind, before the script was finished, Ron and I started brainstorming ideas for how to show Nash's way of thinking, show how he sees patterns and so on. So several of the ideas for shots in the film, the tie and the patterns, lifting patterns and so on, were conceived at that time and then written into the script. And then once the script is finished, then I go through and break it down and pick out shots that seem like they might be effects, and we talk about whether they want to try to get that practically or if that's definitely an effect shot. And also, it's an evolving process, so several of the shots that are in the film weren't even considered shots until later on, until they shot it and found, well, we didn't think about the fact that we can't put a baby in a bathtub with the water up to its nose, so some of the shots were actually added after the fact. So here's the element of the baby shot in the dry tub. Here's the lighting pass for the caustic light effects. And then here's the refraction element of the baby. This is the lighting and refraction combined. And then the mask for the face and knees. And a little waterline element. And then this is the element of the water in the tub, which had to be reconciled. And the really tricky part on that shot is that the shot of the water and the shot of the baby in the tub, it's a moving camera shot, and it was shot handheld. So the moves didn't exactly match. And so Klaus Henke, the compositing supervisor, had to reconcile those two elements and slow it down and speed up the different elements to get the two tubs to register. Here you see the various elements wiping on, the lighting and the water, and then the refraction and various waterline elements. The final shot. So here's a shot of the baby where we just simply remove the hands. You can never get a gratuitous effects shot by Ron Howard. He just has no interest in that. But if you come up with a shot that enhances the telling of the story, clarifies it in some way, then he's all for it. I came up with this idea of having the text come forward, but also that whenever he has one of his epiphanies, that there's a little flash, there's a little ramp up in the exposure. So for instance, in the bar scene when he sees the girl, there's just a little ramp of flashing, and when he's looking at the text and so on, it pulses it, a little bit of flashing right as the text comes forward. We found that to be the most effective because it felt very cinematic. It felt like something that could be photographed. This is for the dating strategy sequence. We shot all of these elements on blue screen so that we could fade them in and out as necessary and create the sort of diagrammatic explanation of Nash's theory with the dating metaphor. We had a clean plate we shot of the bar, and then here you see the combined elements fading in and out. tracking technology and digital domain has really become quite advanced, and so it frees up the director to shoot any kind of move he wants, and we can track it after the fact and place computer-generated elements in. For instance, there's a shot with pigeons, the little girl running through a field of pigeons, and the pigeons don't fly away because she's not real. They, of course, couldn't get real pigeons to hold still as she runs through them, so we created three-dimensional models of pigeons and texture mapped and lit them and so on, and animated them to behave like pigeons, and then placed them in the scene. And again, they're tracked in because the camera is moving, so we duplicate the camera move in the computer in 3 dimensions. Here you see the shot of the little girl running through the empty park there. And then here's a shot where we just placed stand-in 3D pigeons, computer-generated pigeons. And then here's the rendered element of the pigeons, just quick shaded. Here it is comped in with the shot, and then in the final shot with the texturing and lighting. I don't think anybody would ever notice that those were computer-generated pigeons. There's a shot when we pull back from Nash in his window working on his theories. It was shot on stage with just a set of the window piece, and it was shot just on a dolly. Well, we took that shot and we scanned it, and then we tracked the camera move in 3D. So then we were able to create a matte painting of the rest of the building, as well as 3D snow elements. And then also we were able to take the tracked camera motion and apply it to a motion control camera rig, and we were able to add the foreground tree elements that then grow the leaves. And so you need a pass without leaves and a pass with leaves, and it needs to be repeatable so that it doesn't jump. Here's the shot of Nash working on his theory, and we pull back, revealing that this is really just a set piece. We tracked this dolly move, which was shot on set. We scanned the film and then tracked the motion of the camera in the computer so that we could then apply it to a motion control move of these tree elements. And here you see wiping on the shot with the snow composited in. We added snow to the windowsills, and then you see the element of the tree that we shot motion control, and it feels like it's in the shot because it has the same camera move on it. We also added the little butterfly at the end. So compositing supervisor Klaus Henke took all of the elements, the rendered 3D snow and the matte paintings by Shannon Berkeley of the rest of the building, and then the tree elements that I shot on stage, and then the production element that was shot on set, and combined them all together into this changing of the seasons shot. So here you see the Princeton sequence. It's shot in the dead of winter. I understand it was very, very cold. And the bare trees and a camera move. And here you see the painted leaves wiping on. And now notice as the camera moves that the leaves on the tree multiplane in 3 dimensions. That was achieved by breaking the painted elements into many layers and then compositing them in 3D.
It's not Hansen won the Carnegie Scholarship.
No, he has to have it all for himself.
Here we see the empty theater, and then the extras that we had and the cast in the foreground. Klaus created a loop of the foreground people clapping. You can see it's rather seamless, but it is looping, and that way he was able to take that as an element and scale it and place it all over the theater to create this shot. And then we put the light effects over the top of the people, and you see the final effect of a very packed theater. On some level, that's a great compliment when people aren't even aware of the effects. I think that's really the highest compliment because, you know, Beautiful Mind has quite a few effects which are rather apparent. There's a number of them that are invisible, but then there's quite a few that you really see. And even those are invisible because they serve the story. Visual effects, the primary challenge is visual storytelling. And so I found that when you're doing that, when you're really just telling the story, audiences aren't aware of effects, even if they're right there in your face.
In the world of music, movies, and composers, he has demystified the language a little bit for us. So he doesn't create a distance between us and him by using the language of music as an obstacle.
In fact, it's like having a conversation with a writer or an actor or another director. James Horner and I have worked together a number of times, and James is a wonderful storyteller. He loves movies, and he really understands how to help tell the story.
I've known Ron a very long time, and it was a project that I had heard about and was very keen on doing.
When James first heard that we were going to make a movie, he called me. He was amazed. He'd read the book a year and a half before and was fascinated by it. And we had a great conversation, not so much about music, but about the complexity of this character, John Nash.
I had this vision of how numbers work, and to me, that was always something I wanted to bring across musically.
We talked about it, listened to various kinds of music in James's library, motets and music that had influenced the real John Nash.
We had this running abstract idea between he and I. The music and the whole art of mathematics, when you get above a certain stage, is not just literally numbers and solutions. It's more like looking through a kaleidoscope. And you look through a kaleidoscope and you have one thing and you slowly change it, and it changes, it evolves, even though it's numbers or music. To me, when I see a movie, I sort of close my eyes and I say, what mood or what color abstractly do I feel? Like a painting, how does the painting feel when you look at it? I wanted it to have a more global feeling of the sort of abstract quality of his life, and how it's so easy to get drawn in so far that you're not quite sure what's real and what's not anymore when you're as brilliant as that. Charlotte has this unique quality that she's neither child nor adult. I didn't want a children's voice. I didn't want a boy soprano, an adult opera diva. I wanted something that was sort of amorphous. I was looking for a very particular color that only Charlotte Church could fulfill.
He said, well, I want you to kind of make you kind of be an instrument in a way, you know, to kind of have that purity and clarity and brightness that an instrument has, but also like still kind of like with the human vibrato, you know, to kind of make it more human.
There's something about it that floats around that is so unique, that brings a sort of magic and otherworldness to our actor's world.
I've never done this before, like recording with the orchestra, so at first I came in and I was like, if I get it wrong and the orchestra keep getting it right, I'm like, they're just going to think, why did you get her in the first place?
Usually what most singers do is, in their world, is they have to be absolutely perfect. They're all live, and God forbid they make a mistake or forget a line. So in their world, pretty much a lot of it is put on after the fact. They come in after the orchestra. I tend to work live, and if she makes a mistake in there, it's the same as if a French horn maker. We just stop and we do it again. And she's such a great musician that really, she sang perfectly the first time through. She had no problems at all.
Probably you're singing an octave higher, but that's okay. The viola.
It's a very relaxed atmosphere, and James makes everybody feel really comfortable, so it's great.
As a composer, when I come into a film, usually I'm the first outsider, trusted outsider, to see the movies. As the film gets edited, I sort of add input as a supporter.
When James saw the first assembly of the film, He said something that I thought was extraordinary. He was moved by the story, the way it was presented. And out of that, James said, I see changes occurring like fast-moving weather systems. And musically, that's what sort of James went on. That kind of visual idea, that sort of poetic notion. It was a very succinct way of articulating it, because that's what Nash's character was all about, shifting constantly.
I've never done a movie like this. Ron and I, and Brian Grazer, the producer, wanted very much for this film to feel very real.